Masculine submissiveness is the most common and natural aspect of the sexual polarity quadrant. It's the most common because, let me give an example, right, of what masculine submissive can be. It's basically being transactional or being cooperative, right? That is a state of mind and a state of being, and it's a mind frame where you lessen and you forego your desire for dominance and control, and you compromise on your desire to be in control in a particular scenario through understanding that through not exerting your dominance, you will avoid negative consequences, right? Now, what are those negative consequences? Those negative consequences could be as simple as two men having a conversation with one another and not becoming disrespectful because of the implied possibility of violence, the implied threat of violence, right? Now, there's also survival mode submissiveness, right? Where an individual is, they understand that in order to survive, they have to give up control of their body, their time, or what they're doing in order to either receive the resources, to receive the protection, or to receive something that doesn't actually create a desire for submissiveness, right? Now, what it does is it limits how much you enjoy submissiveness. It also makes submissiveness more so a matter of discipline, right? Discipline and willpower, something that takes out of your social battery, rather than it being a matter of you doing something from a genuine place of desire, right? A genuine place of desire and respect. So the feminine submissive is when you're malleable about the way that you are being submissive because of the intrinsic desire and the pleasure that you're experiencing from giving up control, right? When you get into flow, doing something that you really love, right? You are giving up control of yourself to the moment. You're giving up control of yourself to your desire, right? You're giving up control of yourself to whatever it is that is dominating that scenario. So whatever might be dominating the scenario, let's say it's listening to and or making music. Sometimes that can be the feminine submissive, right? It's artistic, right? If you spend money to play video games, right, then the video game may be more so a matter of the place where you experience feminine submissiveness, right? Because you are spending your money to do something, right? Now, it's not the masculine submissive, right? Because the masculine submissive is not something you would choose to do necessarily on your free time, right? Not necessarily something that you would choose to do in your free time in a lot of instances. And something to understand is that femininity is what lubricates the submissiveness to experience domination, right? It's what lubricates it to experience dominance in general, right? Because the most natural state, and it's not saying it's natural as in it's better, but the most common state is the masculine submissive, because you don't want every person to have access to your thought process. You don't want every person to have access to emotions and hormones and different chemicals in your mind that can cause you to become attached to them. You don't want that to happen. And you also don't want to put yourself in a situation with every single person where they have the capacity to make you feel better than you can make yourself feel. Right? So the feminine submissive is what lubricates for dominance. So how can that look, right? If you were to have a conversation with some prostitutes, some sex workers, or sometimes if you listen to like porn stars, a lot of the times those women don't really want to have sex with a man who is super dominant, right? Not for work. They oftentimes don't want to really deal with a guy whose dick is that big for work, right? Because that's stretching them. It makes their work harder. It makes it more difficult, right? It makes it more challenging, right? So the best case scenario for a lot of prostitutes would be being able to find a guy with a small penis who nuts fast, has a lot of money, and he just wants to get something off real quick so that she can get her money, get up out of there, and go about the rest of her day, right? You know, but when it comes to the feminine submissive, it's kind of like that song Hours and Hours by Money Long, right? Like I could do this for hours and hours and hours. When you're engaging in something, and like especially getting into something called subspace is where you more so tap into the feminine submissive, right? And oftentimes the transactional nature of the masculine submissive is something that limits your ability to experience a high level of pleasure. One thing that I've noticed, and I've observed it, I've had conversations with women of different races and ages, especially black women mostly, because I'm a black man and I love my community. I've had conversations with women ranging from in their early 20s to 70s, and some women will admit, right, that the more masculine a woman is, the less likely it's going to be for her to experience vaginal orgasm from penetration. Because if sex is something that you feel like you're giving a man, right, as a reward or as a payment, or you feel obligated to do it because of your relationship status, if you've never experienced it before and broken it down to where it becomes more so in hard skill, or you're in a position where you can tap into the feminine submissive during sex, but you're just masculine submissive outside of the bedroom, typically what will occur is you may not want sex to last super long, right? You may want just like 15 minutes a dick, 5 minutes, or you might want it to last a while, but you're not really tapping into the pleasure of it, not really tapping all the way in to experiencing subspace, to experiencing vaginal orgasm for penetration, right? Like G-spot orgasms, A-spot orgasms, O-spot orgasms, and cervical orgasms. Those are things that aren't likely. Another thing that will be very unlikely is to have an orgasm from giving oral sex, right? So women can have throat gasms, all different type of things, because, there's something called the vagus nerve or the vagus nerve, right? And that nerve is connected from, down into the cervix and around the uterus, right? And it goes up to where the throat is. It's the nerve that connects between. And that's something that can often create a very deep orgasm that somebody can experience, that a woman can have, right? So that's just something to understand about that as well. But something to understand is that arousal taps a person into a submissive individual who gets very aroused and they're focused on their pleasure is somebody who is tapping into that high state of feminine energy. It's kind of like the halo effect, right? Where, everybody knows about that particular joke or meme or whatever it is, where if this one man approaches a woman, it's harassment. But if another man approaches that woman the same way or even more aggressively, then that's just flirting. And that's something that she desires to do, right? It's because her submissiveness hasn't been lubricated by her femininity, right? If a woman is below a certain level of attracted to you, if she's below a certain level of attracted to you, and look at Brody's scale of sexual attraction, then what's going to occur is she's going to have a certain transaction in her mind about what it will take for her to have sex with you, right? And depending on how much of an abundance mindset she's in, she may just reject the opportunity, right? So like, let's say a woman has a high level of self-respect to where she wouldn't have transactional sex with a man as far as for money, unless it was an extremely high amount, then, you would have to have a very, very large amount of money to have sex with a woman who has a 5 level of sexual attraction to you. But every woman has a price in her mind about what that is, right? And that price is really supposed to be, in my opinion, a backup. It's not supposed to be the primary way that you're engaging, because after a period of time, having transactional sex will begin to feel coercive. It'll begin to feel like it's cutting into who you are as a person. It's self-betrayal. It's self-disrespecting. And it's something that will lead a person to eventually feeling down on themselves or having to vilify the other person, even if that transaction is something that's agreed to. And it often leads to a lack of respect. It's difficult for a woman to respect a man who will allow her to participate in having transactional sex with him, right? Like, if you're willing to have sex with a woman who doesn't desire to have sex with you, then for some women that'll give off somewhat creepy or rapey vibes, even if she agrees to do it. So she often doesn't respect you because she feels you don't respect yourself, or you're not desirable enough to attract the women who desire to do it for the sake of doing it. Now, of course, that's not true for every man who purchases and does sex work. Who patron sex work. It's not the truth for every guy, right? But typically that's how it works, right? Because the transactional is the masculine submissive. Now, let me give my definitions of what it means to be submissive, right? Now, when I talk about submissive, it means that you are the primary giver of control and the primary receiver of pleasure, right? But what the masculine submissive does is it takes the pleasure off of the giving up control, and it replaces that pleasure with some type of resource, whether that is typically for a woman, it's going to be emotional validation, social validation, financial investment. That's typically what it's going to be for a woman. And for a man, like if we're interacting with one another, sometimes it might be safety, right? Or avoiding conflict, right? That's like a nice guy or a nice woman. But then you also have, for a lot of men, it may be more so masculine submissive, as in they're trading resources, emotional validation, social validation, or financial investment in order to have access to a woman sexually, right? So you got to understand that aspect of things too. And sometimes that is a caveat when it comes to the sexual polarity quadrant, right? Because if a woman is in a position where she's being a sex worker, right? Or let's say she's doing acculturated prostitution, having transactional sex as far as to maintain her relationship status, not from pleasure, but to maintain the flow and the energy dynamic of her relationship. Now, a woman can accept and embrace that if that's not her primary reason for having sex, right? Like if her primary reason is that she's sexually attracted to, she desires, and she respects her partner, then doing something here and there, you know what I mean? When she may not be 100% in the mood, but she just wants to make her man feel good, there's nothing wrong with that. But when that's the primary reason that you're having sex, it's going to be some things that go off about that, right? Eventually, it's going to erode at that man's ego, because it's a very dry transaction that lacks emotion and it lacks desire. So his ego won't really be stroked as much by it. It's just the physical thing, right? And she will oftentimes not experience the pleasure that she could experience even from the same man. But there are certain things that the femininity lubricating the submissiveness for domination does, right? There's certain things that it does, right? One of those things that it typically does is it takes the transactional nature away from sex. So what does that look like? It may look like a man approaching a woman and being direct about his sexual intentions, right? And her being willing to do it without having any guarantee of a relationship or having any guarantee of resources, any guarantee of dates, any guarantee of social validation. No social validation, emotional validation, or financial investments being made, but she still actively or just reactively desires to engage in a sexual scenario, right? It's because the pleasure she views herself as receiving from this guy and the attraction that she has to this guy is on a level to where she feels that her ego would be validated and her body would be satisfied by engaging in having sex with this particular man. See, that's where you start tapping into the feminine submissive. You got to keep in mind Brody's scale of sexual attraction, because these things aren't either you're attracted or you're not. And sexual attraction is also something that's dynamic and not something that's static. It's not you have one level of sexual attraction and it stays the same forever. Right? A woman can have a 9 level of sexual attraction to you, and just something in her life or something in the way you interacted with one another, or maybe her cup gets low, right? And she can lose the level of sexual attraction that she shows towards you because she's in a depleted place. She can go from a 9 down to treating you as if it's a 6, right? So those are just some things you got to understand as well, right? So one thing that can happen when the femininity lubricates the submissiveness for domination is that, certain things that are viewed as respectful by society are out the window. Certain things that are viewed as socially acceptable are out the window. Certain things that are viewed as being respectful are out the window. So this oftentimes opens up the door for a woman to have a degradation kink, right? And what do I mean by that, right? That means that you might call the woman your bitch, right? Or you might call her a slut during sex, right? Or you might call her a nasty bitch. You might call her a whore. And all that'll do is turn her on even more because she's receptive to your dominance, right? Something I've done before is like link up with a woman, have her suck my dick to send me some money. Because when the sexual attraction goes up to like a 9 level, the woman takes so much pleasure and excitement and desire in the energy dynamic of dealing with a particular man, that she'll be willing to do things that don't even give her direct stimulation, because her arousal level is high enough that different parts of her mind and her body become erogenous zones, because the brain is the biggest sex organ. So like her mouth starts to feel like something that gives her a great sense of pleasure during sex, right? A foot rub might give her a great sense of pleasure. Things that typically aren't viewed as things that create pleasure give her satisfaction. And her respect level makes it so that she desires to please this individual, right? So that just giving him head is something that she desires to do, so much that where she might be willing to spend money just to have an opportunity to give you head, right? Understand that. Now, there's also a difference between a woman who greatly desires to do it because of how much she respects and desires you, and a woman who is in the masculine submissive, giving you head to avoid having sex. Those are two different things, right? But if she very much enjoys it, or she turns herself on when she's doing it, it'll often turn her on to where she'll want to have sex afterwards. Like if she really likes your dick, she admires it, she sees it, and she's feeling on it, she's tasting on it, she's feeling the texture of it, and that kind of just takes her to a mindset where she really needs it now. Like a woman will literally beg you to fuck her while she's sucking your dick sometimes if she has a very high level of sexual attraction to you. And it's not just based off of how you look. Part of it is about how you interact with her. If you're dominant in a way that she becomes receptive to, then pretty much the floodgates open up, right? And when the floodgates open up, it becomes a different type of scenario. But oftentimes, unless the submissiveness is lubricated with femininity for domination, the woman probably won't even have a vaginal orgasm for penetration at all, let alone squirt. Now, there are certain things that are more so a physical thing, but there's a mental aspect as well, right? There's a mental aspect as well. And oftentimes that mental aspect is that desire level. It's that respect level. It's that receptiveness, right? Like that's often what does it when we're talking about the femininity lubricating the submissiveness for domination. Another aspect of it is not needing everything to be fully explained, right? That's another aspect of it. When that respect level is very high, you trust, right? It's a certain trust that comes with it. You trust that what the person wants you to do is going to be more pleasurable than what you would choose to do on your own. So you pretty much let go. You just let go of your inhibitions and they go away. And when those inhibitions go away, whatever they do to you, however they treat you, it can't really hurt you, right? You become pretty much bulletproof when you're in the feminine submissive. Like a man could smack a woman during sex, and although she may feel it a little bit, that just turns her on more. That dominance, like the femininity, it lubricates the submissiveness. And a great example of this is like, let's say a woman is having sex with a man with a large penis, right? Like if you're not very well endowed, or if you're not a very dominant guy, it's a lot easier for a woman to take a masculine submissive approach, right? It's much easier to take a masculine submissive approach. Now I'm going to say this, one thing to understand is this, right? Sometimes there are black nerds who get upset because there are women who overlook them and then dealt with who they consider to be bad boys. But then, after they get worn out or something like that, then they end up, sometimes they'll marry a white man, or they'll be, engaging like that. What you have to understand is that although these are stereotypes that aren't always true, these are still some of the ways that people view things. So sometimes a black woman may see a white man as a little bit more submissive. And oftentimes the way that you operate in your life may be somewhat different from the way that you interact within your sexual relationships. So if a person is very dominant in their everyday life and they make a lot of money, they're in control, they're in charge, oftentimes they'll want to break from being in control, and they may be into like cuckoldry, or they may be into all different types of things, and being dominated by a woman as an escape from having to be in power and in control all the time. So one, it's much easier for him to take a masculine submissive or even a feminine submissive approach with the woman, to where he's, paying for her bills because he may have more money. In her mind, that's how it's typically going to work, because we see what the averages are with the amount of money that people have. He also may be a little bit less egotistical about what his money gives him a right towards, as far as how he expresses himself. Because a lot of times black men will get a little bit of money, there's not even that much money, and feel like they're entitled to a certain type of treatment, right? then also let's say that because he's used to being in control so much, he wants to not be in control during sex. So it's a lot easier for that man to deal with the woman who's more dominant. And then also there's the perception that he may not be as well endowed, which means that it won't be as much of a strain to have regular sex with the man, right? Now, this is not always true, but this is just the perception of it. So it'll often be easier for a white man when it comes to dealing with a certain type of woman than a man who is like a black man who's seen as a quote unquote educated lane. But what you have to understand is that oftentimes it comes from the perception that this man is not really dominant, which may or may not be true, but this is where the perception often comes from. Right? So one thing that can happen is this: when the femininity lubricates the submissiveness for domination, one thing that can occur along the way is that it's like a woman who's taking a very large penis, right? If her femininity is in lubricating her submissiveness for domination, then she's often not going to be aroused enough, receptive enough, or really able to encapsulate into be a sheath for that sword. So she probably won't be able to take it if she's not in her feminine submissive energy. But she might get in her, if she's in her feminine submissive energy, then when she becomes receptive to that level of dominance, then that size of the penis that's very large may be something that begins to open her up to that, and that stretching, that dominance, that pushing her and stretching her beyond what her perceived limits were is something that will create a certain attachment to that experience. And this is often how size queens are created. Like, I know sometimes, guys will listen to interviews of women who are porn stars and how they don't like big dicks like that, but they're taking them on a regular basis, and they're only taking it because they're getting paid, but in real life they don't want that. There are women who are dominant in their own lives, and they're not in a position to need to engage in sex work. So those women will sometimes what will happen is the woman will like the challenge of dealing with the man who's on the larger side. When she opens herself up to being able to receive it, there is a submissive ego that gets triggered, right? Now, what the submissive ego is the ability to receive dominance and taking pride in that, right? That's like a woman who takes pride in her man being the leader. That's a woman who takes pride in her man being dominant. It's a woman who takes pride in being submissive to her man. That's a woman who takes pride in the things she does to show her appreciation to her man. That's a woman who takes pride in being slutted the fuck out by her man, right? That's the submissive ego being tapped into, right? But as long as a woman is in her masculine energy, the masculine submissive, then she's going more so off of social programming and social norms. So the idea of a man being in a dominant position when it comes to her is something that makes her feel uncomfortable, right? It's something that makes her feel unsafe. It's something that makes her feel as if her agency, her autonomy, and her boundaries are being infringed upon, right? That's what it makes her feel. So when we understand this, there's a reason why you want a woman to be in her feminine submissive. But what you have to understand about the feminine submissive is that that's an abundance mindset. And sometimes a woman can be there for a short period of time based off of a high level of desire. But if she doesn't have the ability to self-soothe, if she doesn't have the ability to communicate, then she'll be there for a little while. But then if she loses too much and her cup gets too low while she's in that state of feminine submissiveness, then what's going to happen along the way is that she will begin to go through sexual polarity erosion, right? And that sexual polarity erosion will make her cup low. And then typically when a woman's cup gets low, and I think I've said this before, she will typically go celibate, deal with the man who's a little bit, deal with a beta male, like a man who's a little bit more submissive, or she may deal with the woman. That's just typically how it works. There are women who are legitimately lesbian. That's not the women I'm talking about. I'm talking about women who are a little bit bi-curious, right? A little bit bisexual, but primarily they're hetero-romantic, primarily they're heterosexual. But when they've gone through enough and their cup got low, they'll deal with the woman for a short period of time. And then once their cup gets filled back up. See, part of how a woman's cup gets drained sometimes is that stretching process, right? Where she has to be in a high state of desire in order to receive that dominance, right? Like having a woman just come to suck your dick, she may enjoy that, but it still pours out of her cup to be in that high state of energy, right? So if a woman's cup is low, she won't really have the capacity to be in the feminine submissive very often. So she'll have to compartmentalize it, or she'll have to just have a gentleman gigolo complex and do that for a short period of time with men that she doesn't respect enough to really get on his program and deal with them long term, right? Or it'll have to be a situation where they're pretty much on the verge of integrating with the man. That's a relationship that starts very quickly, you know. But the thing is this: if you give a woman too much during that time, she comes out of it, she may see you as weak, right? And if you give a woman, and if you take too much from a woman when she's in that state of mind, right? Let's say a woman gets in the feminine submissive and she's lubricated, right, for that dominance. Then what can happen is she may spend a whole bunch of money on you, right? She may skip work to get the dick, right? She may do a variety of things that may put her in a bad position. And if you allow her to do it, then when she leaves out of that highly aroused state of mind, she will often lose respect for you because she feels as if you are taking advantage of her being in a very receptive state of mind. Even if she offered, even if she offered, you didn't ask her, she just wanted to go ahead and do something for you. If she leaves out of this state of mind and feels overly depleted, then she'll often have to vilify you. That's, watch my video on the bait and switch exposed. She'll often have to vilify you in order to justify and rationalize that sub drop, right? It's like you have to understand what subspace and sub drop are when we're talking about the feminine submission. Right? But the thing about it is this: unless a woman's submissiveness is lubricated with her femininity, right, for domination, unless that's going on, she won't really be able to deal with the dominant man unless it's a feminine dominant man who will be using his feminine energy to lubricate her masculine energy so she can be in a little bit more feminine energy in that state of mind, pouring into her cup so that she can be dominated. Now, what can that look like? That can look like a man lying to a woman. That can look like a man bait and switching and pouring into her cup, right, while she's in a masculine submissive state, and pouring into her cup until she feels validated, until she feels good about herself in that moment, and then taking that away, and then taking it away to bring up a desire for her to be somewhat transactional. But because she's in that state of mind, she gets turned into that moment. She gets turned into it. Sometimes that could be wanting her so much that he's willing to take it. Listen, this shit gets dark and it gets deep, right? There's some women who have a consensual non-consent type of fetish or kink, really for the sake of feeling wanted enough for a man to just go ahead and take it. That's how she's receptive to the dominance, is a man disrespecting her boundaries. Because that's feminine for him to not care about if she consents, right? That's feminine dominant, right? That's to have dominance that doesn't respect boundaries. That's having dominance that doesn't have its own boundaries. So that may be a man who jumps very quickly into a relationship. That may be a man who bait and switches himself. There may be a man who overly validates the woman and tries to make her feel special about himself. It's like the old school idea of what a player was. Think about Martin, the character that Martin played on the thin line between love and hate, right? So when you're looking at these different things, it's important to understand that when it comes to the sexual polarity quadrant, desire and respect are the main things that does it, but femininity lubricates submissiveness for domination. This is Coach Brody. I'm out.